The roar of the crowd at the Montreal Forum is deafening. It's Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, 1965. The building shakes with excitement as the Canadiens battle for hockey's greatest prize. At center ice stands Jean Béliveau, tall and commanding, the iconics he proudly displayed on his red jersey. His calm demeanor steadies his teammates even in this moment of intense pressure. Long before this moment, Jean Béliveau was a boy from Trois-Rivières, Quebec, born in 1931 to a working-class family. Even as a child, Jean stood taller than his peers. While his height initially made him somewhat awkward, he quickly grew into his frame and developed remarkable coordination for a boy his size. Winter days in Quebec meant one thing: hockey. Young Jean spent countless hours on frozen ponds, developing the skills that would one day make him famous. By his teenage years, Béliveau's talent was impossible to ignore. He played with a rare combination of size, skill, and grace that drew attention throughout the province. Local scouts began to take notice of the tall, talented center, who could control the game with his smooth skating and playmaking abilities. His hands were soft for a big man, allowing him to stick handle in tight spaces and make passes that other players couldn't imagine. The Montreal Canadiens had their eye on Jean early. The team's general manager, Frank Zelka, recognized Béliveau's potential to become not just a star, but a cornerstone of the franchise. Yet despite the Canadiens' interest, Jean initially hesitated to turn professional. He enjoyed playing for the Quebec Aces, where he was comfortable and well compensated, making more money than many NHL players of the time. Zelka, determined to bring Béliveau to Montreal, made an unprecedented move. The Canadiens purchased the entire Quebec Senior Hockey League, converting it to professional status. This strategic maneuver meant that Béliveau was now technically a professional player, making him eligible for the NHL draft. In 1953, after years of courting, Jean finally signed with the Canadiens, beginning what would become one of the most storied careers in hockey history. The pressure on Béliveau was immense from the start. Montreal, a city that lived and breathed hockey, expected greatness from their new star. The famous forum was packed with knowledgeable fans who demanded excellence. French-Canadian fans particularly saw Jean as their representative on the ice, a homegrown talent who carried their hopes and dreams with each shift. The weight of these expectations would have crushed many young players, but Béliveau's broad shoulders seemed designed to carry such burdens. Adjusting to the NHL wasn't immediate. The speed and physicality tested even Béliveau's considerable talents. During his first full season, he faced critics who questioned whether his finesse style could succeed at the highest level. Some veterans targeted the rookie with physical play, trying to intimidate the newcomer. But Jean adapted quickly, using his 6 feet 3 inches frame to protect the puck while developing a toughness that complemented his skill play. By his second season, Béliveau was no longer just promising, he was dominant. He scored 37 goals and added 36 assists, establishing himself as one of the league's premier centers. His reach gave him advantages in face-offs. His vision allowed him to find teammates through the smallest openings, and his wrist shot was both accurate and deceptively powerful. Most importantly, he elevated the play of those around him, a quality that defines true greatness. As the 1950s progressed, Béliveau became the centerpiece of a Canadiens team that was building toward dynasty status. Alongside players like Maurice "Rocket" Richard, Bernie "Boom Boom" Geoffrion, and Doug Harvey, Jean helped lead Montreal to Stanley Cup victories. With each passing season, his leadership qualities became more apparent. He led not through loud speeches or fiery displays, but through consistent excellence and unwavering professionalism. The fans of the Forum began to appreciate that they were watching someone special, a player who represented the sport at its finest. His play on the ice was matched by his character off it. Always impeccably dressed, unfailingly polite, and genuinely humble, Béliveau set a standard for how a hockey star should conduct himself. In a city divided by language and culture, Jean became a unifying figure, respected and admired by everyone who encountered him. As the decade ended, it became clear that Jean Béliveau was more than just a superstar player. He was becoming the face of a franchise, the embodiment of the Montreal Canadiens' values and traditions. The stage was set for the next chapter in his remarkable journey, leadership. The year 1961 marked a pivotal moment in both Jean Béliveau's career and Canadiens history. When Maurice "Rocket" Richard retired in 1960, the team needed a new leader. Coach Toe Blake and management didn't hesitate in their choice. Béliveau, at 30 years old, was named the 16th captain of the Montreal Canadiens. The moment he first wore the C on his jersey was understated, just as Jean himself would have wanted it, but its significance was immense. This wasn't just an honor. It was a responsibility that would define the next decade of Canadiens hockey. Béliveau's approach to leadership was unique and perfectly suited to the team's needs. Unlike some captains who led with fiery speeches or intimidating presence, Jean led through quiet dignity and unwavering example. His teammates often remarked that they felt a personal obligation to play their best for their captain. He rarely needed to raise his voice. A simple glance or word from Béliveau carried more weight than shouted instructions from others. This quiet authority extended beyond the locker room. Officials, opponents, and even journalists treated Jean with a level of respect rarely seen in professional sports. The early 1960s presented challenges for the Canadiens. After dominating the 1950s with 5 consecutive Stanley Cups, the team faced stronger competition from an improving league. The Chicago Blackhawks, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Detroit Red Wings all built competitive teams that threatened Montreal's supremacy. These years tested Béliveau's leadership as the team worked to maintain their championship standard while integrating younger players into their system. The relationship between Captain Béliveau and Coach Toe Blake was one of mutual respect and shared vision. Blake, himself a former Canadiens captain, understood the pressures Jean faced. The two men approached hockey with similar philosophies, emphasizing team play, discipline, and respect for the game. While Blake handled strategy and motivation, Béliveau served as his extension on the ice, making subtle adjustments and ensuring every player understood their role. This partnership created a cohesive environment where players knew exactly what was expected of them. The 1964-65 season demonstrated Béliveau's leadership at its finest. The Canadiens faced the Chicago Blackhawks in a hard-fought Stanley Cup final. In Game 7, with pressure at its peak, Jean scored the opening goal just 14 seconds into the game and added an assist later. His calm presence steadied younger teammates as they secured another championship. When he accepted the Stanley Cup from NHL President Clarence Campbell, the roar from the foreign crowd acknowledged not just the team's victory, but their captain's role in making it possible. What followed was the establishment of another Canadiens dynasty. Between 1964 and 1969, Montreal won the Stanley Cup 4 times in 5 years. Béliveau remained a constant centerpiece, adapting his game as he entered his mid-30s. While his speed might have diminished slightly, his hockey intelligence and playmaking abilities only seemed to improve with age. He became even more effective at using his size to protect the puck and create space for teammates. His face-off skills remained elite, giving Montreal possession advantage in crucial situations. The dynasty years weren't without difficulties. Injuries occasionally sidelined Béliveau, and the expansion of the NHL in 1967 brought new challenges. The pressure of playing in Montreal never lessened. Expectations remained championship or failure each season. Through it all, Jean maintained his composure, never too high after victories or too low after defeats. This emotional stability provided an anchor for the entire organization during turbulent times. Béliveau's leadership extended beyond game situations. He took particular interest in mentoring younger players, especially fellow French Canadians who faced additional scrutiny in Montreal. Rookies were often nervous meeting the legendary captain for the first time, only to find him approachable and genuinely interested in their development. Many later stars, including Yvon Cournoyer and Serge Savard, credited Béliveau's guidance as crucial to their successful transitions to the NHL. The media demands in hockey-obsessed Montreal were relentless, but Jean handled them with characteristic grace. He made himself available after both victories and defeats, speaking thoughtfully in both French and English. He never blamed teammates or officials for losses and deflected personal praise after victories. This accountability and humility set a standard throughout the organization that became part of the Canadiens' identity. By the end of the 1960s, Béliveau had established himself not just as team captain, but as hockey royalty. Opposing players showed visible respect when sharing the ice with him. Fans in rival cities applauded him despite their team allegiances. His name became synonymous with class and excellence, representing the very best aspects of the sport. As the decade ended and Jean entered the final phase of his playing career, his legacy as the Canadiens' greatest captain was already secure, though his greatest moment of triumph still awaited. The 1970-71 season brought Jean Béliveau to a crossroads. At 39, after 18 seasons with the Canadiens, he privately decided this would be his final year as a player. Rather than announce his retirement early and create a season-long farewell tour, Jean kept his decision mostly to himself, allowing the focus to remain on team goals. The hockey god seemed to appreciate this selflessness, setting the stage for a perfect ending to his playing career. The Canadiens entered the 1971 playoffs, facing significant challenges. They would need to defeat the defending champion Boston Bruins, led by Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito, just to advance beyond the first round. With rookie goaltender Ken Dryden and Béliveau's steady leadership, Montreal accomplished this upset and defeated Minnesota and Chicago to capture the Stanley Cup. In the final moments of Game 7 against Chicago, as victory became certain, Béliveau's teammates ensured he would be on the ice when the final buzzer sounded. The image of Jean accepting the Stanley Cup one final time, his 10th championship as a player, provided the perfect conclusion to an unparalleled playing career. Retirement from playing did not mean departure from the Canadiens organization. Team president David Molson immediately offered Béliveau an executive position with the club. Jean's transition to the front office was seamless. His role officially involved public relations and marketing, but his influence extended throughout the organization. Players, coaches, and executives all sought his counsel. His presence maintained a connection to the team's glorious past while helping shape its future. The championships continued in the 1970s, with Jean contributing from a different role, but taking quiet satisfaction in the organization's continued success. Béliveau's impact on the community reached new heights after his retirement from playing. The Jean Béliveau Foundation, established to help children in need, raised millions of dollars over the decades. Unlike some athletes whose charitable work consists mainly of lending their names to causes, Jean remained actively involved, regularly visiting hospitals and attending fundraising events. Children who had never seen him play came to know him as a tall, kind gentleman who brightened difficult days with his visits. Parents who had cheered him as players found themselves even more impressed by his humanitarian efforts. His personal life reflected the same values he displayed publicly. Jean and his wife Elise, married in 1953, maintained a strong partnership throughout the demands of his hockey career and beyond. Their daughter Helene and granddaughters Mylene and Magali became the center of Jean's world. Despite countless opportunities to leverage his fame for personal gain, Béliveau preferred a relatively modest lifestyle. He valued privacy without isolating himself from the public that had supported him for decades. Friends noted that fame never changed the essential Jean Béliveau. He remained the same thoughtful, considerate person they had always known. Even fierce rivals spoke of Béliveau with unique respect. Legends like Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr, competitors who battled Jean on the ice, described him as a perfect ambassador for hockey. They noted his rare combination of competitive intensity and sportsmanship. In an era when fighting and intimidation were common, Béliveau rarely engaged in such tactics, yet nobody questioned his toughness. Opponents recalled how Jean would help them up after a clean check, then proceed to outplay them on the next shift. This earned him a respect that transcended team loyalties and made him a unifying figure in a sport often divided by intense rivalries. The captains who followed Béliveau in Montreal, from Yvon Connor and Serge Savard to Bob Gainey and Guy Carbonneau, all acknowledged the standard he established. Leading the Canadiens always meant carrying the weight of the sea that Jean had worn with such distinction. Each subsequent captain faced the inevitable comparisons to Béliveau, not just in playing ability, but in character and leadership. That so many succeeded is a testament to Jean's lasting influence on the organization's culture. He never imposed himself on his successors, but remained available whenever they sought his guidance. As decades passed, Béliveau's stature in Canadian culture only grew. He received numerous honors, including appointment to the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian recognition. Streets and arenas were named after him. The Hockey Hall of Fame waived its normal waiting period, inducting him immediately upon his retirement in 1971. His autobiography became a bestseller, introducing younger generations to his remarkable story. Through it all, Jean maintained a humility that had always been his hallmark, viewing these accolades as recognition not just of him but of the teams, coaches, and fans who had been part of his journey. Perhaps most remarkably, in an era of increasing cynicism toward public figures, Jean Béliveau's reputation remained untarnished. No scandals or controversies emerged to complicate his legacy. The man perfectly aligned with the public image, a rarity for any celebrity. Young players entering the Canadiens organization quickly learned that invoking Béliveau's name meant referencing the highest standard of professionalism both on and off the ice. His legacy became not just about championship banners and statistical achievements, but about representing hockey Montreal, and Canada with unmatched dignity. In his later years, Jean Béliveau settled comfortably into his role as the ultimate ambassador for the Montreal Canadiens. His official position with the organization eventually ended, but his connection to the team never diminished. Every opening night at the Montreal Forum, and later at the Bell Centre, fans look for Béliveau in his regular seat. His presence linked the current team to its glorious past, a living reminder of the standard to which the Canadiens always aspired. When the team celebrated its centennial in 2009, Jean stood as the centerpiece of the festivities, representing the organization's values more completely than any trophy or banner could. Béliveau's public appearances became cherished occasions for hockey fans across generations. Grandparents who had watched him play brought their grandchildren to meet the legend in person. At autograph sessions, Jean never rushed through signings, taking time to speak with each fan, asking their names and responding to their comments. Unlike many former stars who seemed burdened by such interactions, Béliveau appeared genuinely grateful for the opportunity to connect with people who appreciated the game he loved. His handshake, still firm and accompanied by direct eye contact, made each person feel momentarily special. The respect Jean commanded extended throughout the hockey world. At NHL events, younger Hall of Famers would approach him with visible reverence. Team owners and league executives sought his opinions on the state of the game. When Béliveau entered a room of hockey dignitaries, conversations would pause as people acknowledged his presence. This wasn't mere celebrity recognition. It represented genuine respect for a man who had come to embody the sport's highest ideals. In NHL arenas outside Montreal, public address announcers would note his attendance, invariably prompting standing ovations from fans of all team allegiances. Beyond hockey, Jean represented a bridge between French and English Canada during times of political tension. While never overtly political, his widespread popularity across linguistic and cultural divides made him a unifying figure. Both Federalist and separatist politicians in Quebec claimed him as a supporter, though Béliveau skillfully avoided being used as a symbol by either side. His quiet patriotism embraced both his French-Canadian heritage and his identity as a Canadian, demonstrating that these loyalties could coexist harmoniously. Prime ministers sought his company and his counsel, recognizing his unique position in Canadian culture. Health challenges in his later years revealed another dimension of Béliveau's character. He faced heart problems, cancer, and stroke with the same dignity that had marked his playing career. During hospital stays, he showed more concern for fellow patients than for himself. His recovery efforts demonstrated the determination that had made him a champion athlete. Jean never sought sympathy, instead using his health struggles to raise awareness for various medical causes. Even in illness, he turned personal difficulty into an opportunity to help others, reinforcing the selflessness that had always defined him. As Béliveau entered his 80s, the hockey community began to contemplate the inevitable. The man who had seemed timeless was, after all, mortal. His public appearances became less frequent, though each was treasured more deeply. When he attended Canadiens games, the camera would find him in the stands, prompting emotional ovations. Younger fans who knew him primarily through stories and footage nonetheless understood they were in the presence of hockey royalty. The Canadiens organization, anticipating the unthinkable, quietly prepared to honor their greatest captain when the time came. On December 2nd, 2014, Jean Béliveau passed away at age 83. The news spread quickly throughout Canada and the hockey world, triggering an outpouring of grief that transcended sports. The province of Quebec granted him a state funeral, an honor typically reserved for political leaders. For 2 days, thousands filed past his casket at the Bell Centre, many waiting hours in winter cold to pay their respects. The funeral itself brought together diverse elements of Canadian society: political leaders, athletes, celebrities, and ordinary citizens, united in honoring a man whose impact extended far beyond his athletic achievements. In the years since his passing, Béliveau's legacy has only strengthened. The Jean Béliveau Trophy is awarded annually to the NHL player who demonstrates the greatest humanitarian contribution. The Canadiens established a fund in his name to help children in need. His number 4 remains prominently retired in the Bell Centre rafters. More subtly, but perhaps more significantly, his example continues to influence how the Canadiens select their captains and how the organization represents itself to the world. Current players who never met Jean nonetheless understand that wearing the Canadiens jersey carries expectations of excellence and dignity that he established. Montreal has celebrated many hockey heroes throughout its rich history, from Howie Morans and Maurice Richard to Guy Lafleur and Patrick Roy. Each holds a special place in the city's collective memory. Yet Jean Béliveau occupies a unique position even within this pantheon. He is remembered not just for what he accomplished, but for how he accomplished it. Not merely for the championships he won, but for the lives he touched. Not simply for his skill with a hockey stick, but for his grace as a human being. In a sport that celebrates toughness and aggression, Jean Béliveau demonstrated that true strength is found in dignity, respect, and compassion. The ultimate testament to Béliveau's impact isn't found in record books or trophy cases. It resides in the countless people, teammates, opponents, fans, and strangers whose lives were improved through their connection to him. Perhaps no sports figure has ever better represented the ideal that athletic greatness and personal goodness can coexist perfectly in one individual. For as long as hockey is played in Montreal, the standard against which all Canadiens captains will be measured remains Jean Béliveau, the gentleman ambassador who became the soul of a franchise and the conscience of a sport.